Welcome back to Brojo Online. I got something really special for you today. I had a podcast interview with a guy named Jacob Skidmore. He goes by the handle the Nameless Narcissist on YouTube. Jacob is a man who's been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. He's what you would call a self-aware narcissist. Now, the word narcissist gets thrown around all the time these days, and very few people actually know what it means. They just use it to describe anyone they disagree with or anyone who treats them poorly. What Jacob is doing is putting it out there what it really means to be a narcissist, what you need to know in dealing with a narcissist. And in today's conversation, we dig into what it is like to be a narcissistic personality, what it's like on the inside, and what it is Jacob's hoping to achieve in his life now that he's aware and working on this so-called disorder. This is a fascinating conversation, one of the most interesting conversations I've ever had, and I'm really excited to share it with you guys today. All right, man. So tell me about NPD. Tell me about its relationship with you and what you want to share with people about there.
Okay, so let me think. When I was well, see, it's always hard when I talk about my when I was diagnosed because it was first floated when I was around 15 years old because I had like very serious anger issues, and I was made to go into therapy because of a particularly violent occurrence. I'm not going to get into that right off the bat, but I kind of ignored it at the time. If anything, I thought it made me better than other people.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, right? And eventually, I had a relationship that went sour when I was around 20-ish or so. And I did end up cheating on her. And I asked myself, why did I do that? It's been a question I've asked myself basically my entire life. Why am I doing these things that obviously are detrimental to my own well-being and that seem to be at odds with almost what everybody else does? So I end up going into therapy to impress another girl, if I'm being honest.
Mm-hmm.
But I stayed for that reason. Eventually, I ended up like after like because like I was very I when you're a narcissist and you're kind of smart, and I like to think of myself as kind of smart. You kind of learn that in order to get the validation and stuff that you need, that acting narcissistic typically doesn't get that reaction. So I like hid my grandiosity, which is like the telltale sign, for like a year, maybe two. Um, and I remember one day I was complaining about some of my friends or something because I felt misunderstood by them. And I just kind of sat back and I chuckled. And my therapist was like, "What?" And I was like, "Well, it's," I was literally, I said something along the lines of like, "Well, I mean, it's I don't blame them though because they're all so fucking stupid." And she was like, "Wait, what?" And I went on like this grandiose tirade, being like, "Well, they all complain that I act like I'm better than them, but I mean, look at them and look at me. See how smart I am, stuff like that." And I remember just laughing out loud as I'm about to leave, being like, "Oh, that felt good." And that's around the time I was diagnosed, like officially, because I just kind of let all that crap out.
Mm.
Um, at first I was kind of like confused because I was like, I hate myself. How could I be a narcissist if I lack any of that self-love, right? I think I'm better than people, but also I hate myself. um and I come to learn eventually, because I wanted to understand myself, so I deep dove into all the information out there. And effectively, what narcissistic personality disorder is, and what people miss, is that it's not about the grandiosity. It's not about thinking you're better than people. It's not about abuse. It's about that because of this self loathing that we have, we're constantly going out trying to seek outside affirmation just so we can kind of prop that up. And so we're going to act like very like above people, very grandiose, very domineering. So people will give us that feedback of, yes, you're powerful, you're worth something, you're above people even. It just in that desperate bid to try to not feel like crap all the time. I can go from between being super grandiose and like thinking I'm better than everybody to like these intense vulnerable states where I feel like I like that self-hatred just is boiling in me, and I'm like very paranoid and kind of lashing out, and I just am like super depressed and stuff like that. And that can even drive people with my disorder when they get into those states to like things like suicide. Um, but yeah, that's kind of how I would describe how I got diagnosed and what narcissism really is as a disorder.
One of the reasons I love these kinds of conversations is because whenever you dig into anybody's unique rare diagnosis, all you hear is just normal human traits, just
Yeah,
dialed up maybe, or perhaps skewed towards a certain. I don't know a single person who, that I've dived in deep with whose self identity is not grandiose. But they don't,
yeah,
even if they say I'm a loser, there's a kind of heroism in it.
there is. Yeah,
The
that's something I
underdog.
actually say a lot because it's like there is a what like let's say somebody like I've seen a lot of people describe themselves as like, oh, a monster, let's say. Take that word monster, there's power in that. There's a lot of power in that word. And obviously they're being self-deprecating, but that in itself is still grandiose.
Absolutely. And this is what I think. This might be one of the reasons that the term narcissist gets thrown around so much, is because so many people can actually, at least in moments, um, live by those traits and act on those traits.
Yeah.
I certainly have. Uh, it's also interesting, the part you're talking about, kind of noticing that you sabotage a relationship and going, why the fuck would I do that? It's not in my best interest. Every single
Yeah.
person I know does things that are not in their best interest. Big, stupid
Exactly.
things.
Everyone has so much self-reflecting to do to really understand themselves to that level. And maybe narcissists have more work to do in that, but it's a struggle that everybody has.
Absolutely. So I just find that really fascinating. I wasn't really expecting you to portray any traits or views that are totally alien to humanity or anything like that.
Yeah.
I even think sometimes I used to work with some schizophrenics and they hear voices. I'm like,
Yeah.
who doesn't hear voices? They just hear them louder, and they think it's somebody else.
Ooh, that's a really good way to describe it. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, hell, I have a friend who's schizophrenic, and you would never even know if it weren't for the fact that like she'll talk about it sometime, or sometimes she'll have really bad paranoid ideation, but like, or like she'll like be startled by something, but at the end of the day, it's not like these depictions that you see of the mentally ill, where it's like, oh, they're unfathomably like different from people.
Yeah, look, I've been to forensic mental health, like criminally insane, and I'm still yet to find people that are somehow not human in their traits. They're just extreme, perhaps, or consistent or
Mm.
inconsistent, as it sort of suits. Uh, so it's almost a kind of irony for someone with NPD to be so forthright and transparent,
Mm.
because apparently you're not supposed to do that. You're
Right, right.
supposed to be totally Machiavellian and manipulative all the time, and it's slightly possible that even the honesty is that, but then of course everybody could be doing that to some extent.
And it's interesting because like a big part of narcissism is the hiding the self, right? We're trying to portray ourselves, we're like hiding everything we really think about ourselves because we find it shameful. And basically, and that's where you hear like mirroring and stuff like that, because we're going to be trying to match people's personalities to get them to like us. um Gosh, where was I going with that? But oh yeah, but and I never lie about this, but part of my motivation in doing what I do is for attention and for people praising me for my honesty. So I guess you could say it's manipulative of me to do that, but it's also not my only motivation. And also, even if it was, I find it to be a much better way to get that than some of the other avenues that I could have taken.
I often get into discussions with people about what qualifies as kind of negative manipulation, considering we're all
Mm,
manipulating all the time. And I think you just demonstrated
yes.
one of the ways to get out of that question is to make sure that whatever strategy you do have is revealed.
Yes.
So even if you're doing it for selfish reasons, which really I think we all are all the time, at least if you say that's why I'm doing it, no, it's neutralized. I can't do harm. Like you said,
And that's
you're getting what you
that's
want.
something I say all the time is that manipulation doesn't have to be intrinsically bad. It can be used for ways that are pro-social, so to speak. I can manipulate people into and I I try not to nowadays because I feel like it's taking away. I recognize that's like taking away from somebody's agency, and that personally, I can see why that would be a quote unquote bad thing. But that being said, I have never left the view that manipulation has to be bad.
Right, yeah. Cool. Well, let's keep diving in and get a little deeper on this. I mean, one of the first things I really, like I said, I'm curious about is how you wind up, going from obviously quite painful experiences and self-sabotage through to therapy kind of by accident, right? To
Yeah.
impress someone and go, oh shit, this is actually helpful. Um, through to, yeah, like you said, what's the inspiration for you going online and, letting everyone see what,
Exposing myself, so to
yeah,
speak.
and everyone
Um,
your diagnosis for that matter.
yeah. It's so this so like there was two things that really played into that decision. Where the first one was I was in a very bad point in my life and I just needed somewhere to vent. And, again, attention even at this point was a motivation too. But I was like so frustrated by the fact that I felt like nobody really understood me because of the differences in my cognition and some other people's. And so I was just kind of desperate for a place to do that. And at the same time, as I was kind of researching my disorder and finding other people that do struggle with it and are trying to better themselves, how many people in my communities would come under a law of harassment even though they're trying to work on their themselves, and it would frustrate me so much because I'm like, these people don't have an accurate view of what we go through or what this disorder is. And so I really went in. I did one of my motivations going into it is I want to destigmatize. I want to show people this isn't what they think it is. Yes, we can hurt people. Like, I'm never going to deny that, and I think it's important for people with my disorder to recognize that we can be hurtful, to because we need to avoid that. But at the same time, it's not like we're these evil mustache twirling villains going around being like, I'm going to take advantage of all these people and I'm going to ruin their lives or whatever people think that we do. It's that we're desperately trying to get our needs met, and we kind of trample on people to those ends without, most of the time, without even realizing it.
Now, again, there's nothing you're saying that doesn't apply to pretty much everyone in some way. It's quite my sort of target market, I guess, with coaching is what I call nice guys and people pleasers.
Yeah.
A lot of the times they would be behavioral wise on the opposite end of the spectrum. They do the opposite of trampling people. They allow themselves to be trampled, if anything,
Mm-hmm.
self-sacrifice and stuff. And yet, it's all done with self-serving manipulation as a motive.
Yeah.
And quite often, like you imagine someone who people pleases their way into a relationship that lasts for 10 years. They steal 10 years from someone by being fake. I mean, how's that not harm?
Yeah. Yeah, honestly. I feel that's almost more messed up than what I do.
Yeah. Well, yours is kind of short and sharp, right? And
Yeah.
perhaps, the person who's more kind on the front end does more damage in the back. I don't know. But the idea that you're somehow doing something that's alien or unusual, or other people can't relate to it and they can isolate your group and say they're evil, that just doesn't quite line up with truth of things.
They're practicing a lack of empathy there.
Right. Ironic, right? Well, let's touch on your views on some of the kind of ideas that come up for most people around narcissism. Words like evil, words like psychopath, words like, totally unconscientious or whatever, no feeling, no empathy. Tell me a bit about your views on that shit.
Well, I want to start off with saying, for people that don't have accurate views of my disorder, I don't really blame them. For even people that like throw around the term, because you go on the internet, you're going to find all sorts of bullcrap. Like, you're not going to find reliable information, and unless you go really deep. And I can't blame people for not going that deep into it, because I mean, like, at the end of the day, who really cares? They have their own mind. But I think the most damaging thing that I really hate is like the inherent pathologizing of abuse. It's like, because they're mentally ill, they're abusing a bunch of people, and they are inevitably going to abuse people. I do think that at certain severe ends of the disorder, you could make the argument that it's more inherent. And I would argue that because of our emotional dysregulation, we when we're not actively working on those things, and I don't even think you have to be an aware narcissist to start working on these things, but you will end up hurting people. But so does everybody. The issue becomes when we refuse to take accountability. In terms of the non-feeling stuff, it's it's so much more nuanced than just I don't feel emotions. Obviously, like I feel anger. Obviously, that's an emotion. There are ones that I lack though. I don't feel guilt. I'm not, but like, and I'm not sure how many, if this is universal narcissism. I feel a lot of shame, but I don't feel guilt. And I think that comes from the preoccupation with myself. I can't really consider, and because like I can't feel that I am my actions. That's a whole thing though. Empathy, I don't necessarily understand the idea that you can feel somebody's emotions by just like witnessing them. Like I would say I can sympathize with people to a certain degree. I don't really understand empathy though. Remorse, I'm not sure that I feel. So there are some truths to this, right? These traits do sometimes make it easier to hurt people, but but again, it's more due to our own preoccupation, our focus on ourselves and our own needs, making sure that we get our needs met because, we are in a lot of pain all the time, rather than any sort of malicious act. They're more of just byproducts of the fact that I'm not happy, I guess you could say.
Would it be fair to sum up then that, like, whatever harm you do to others is a byproduct of a different goal? Like, you're trying to, as you
Yes.
might say, getting your own needs met, but primarily harming others is not the goal.
No, not at all. Like one of the symptoms is interpersonal exploitation. It's never like I'm trying to get money from them. It's never like I'm trying to steal from them. It's like, for a good example of this is I date somebody for status, which is exploitative, right? But it's not because I'm trying to like abuse and use this person. It's because I feel like I need to date somebody who has status in order to feel better about myself.
Right. So if you got your needs met and it didn't harm the other person, you wouldn't need to add to that to make sure they also got harmed, sort of thing.
Exactly. I mean, what would be the point of harming a person?
Right. So it has to serve the goal. It can't be just
Mm-hmm.
for the pleasure of it itself. I mean, I worked with some of the worst in terms of violent and sexual criminal offenders, and there is a category that I'd say is some sort of objective evil, and it's a very small slice. But these are people whose primary motive is they get their pleasure from
Yeah.
other people suffering, and
I'm sure there's some narcissists that are like that,
yeah,
but it's not a staple disorder. There's sadism isn't even a something you can find in the DSM.
right.
You like sadism is just this like whole other thing, because if this person's only problem is that they enjoy hurting other people, well, since they're not suffering, that's not a mental condition. That's just their pieces of shit, more or less.
Yeah. Well, I actually wonder how much you can enjoy someone else's suffering if you don't have empathy. If you can't like feel it as well. If you're just watching it as a
Yes.
movie, then what do you get out? I don't know. I don't know. But it is good to make this distinction because a lot of people will assume, it's the hostile attribution bias. They're assuming that you're actually trying to cause harm as a primary motive,
No, not
rather
at
than
all.
actually, it's kind of more like a bull in a china shop kind of thing.
Mm.
Harm will be done to get what you need. It's
Yes.
interesting. I want to hear your distinction on shame versus guilt. So maybe we should start with some
Ooh,
definitions because this is pretty important stuff.
yes.
So when you say you feel shame but not guilt, what do you mean?
Mm. So I want to point out that this is going to be different. I'm pretty good at articulating it nowadays, but narcissists have a lexicon. We can't recognize our own emotions. It's very hard for us to be able to discern them.
Okay.
So maybe a narcissist isn't the best person to ask, but usually from what people describe is guilt is an emphasis on the action. It's like, oh, I did a bad thing. While shame is, I'm a bad person because I'm a bad person. Like it's more focused on self, more self-loathing. Ironic. I'm not sure if this is appropriate to talk about, but I did feel guilt once, but I was tripping on shrooms. And it was because I wasn't able to tell a difference up until that. Well, or I was doubtful about that there was a difference until that happened. And I was like, whoa, I've never felt an emotion so other focused, I guess you could say. Because with shame, it's just, I'm a bad, terrible person because I did this thing or something like that.
Cool. I mean, that's my understanding of the difference between those terms as well.
Yeah.
Uh, but they're actually quite grey lined in between because quite often people are shamed because of they feel guilty and so.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, they can serve the same function, I would argue, in a lot of cases.
Yeah, well, I wonder how many people are actually confident enough to feel bad about what they did without feeling bad as a person. And yeah, that would be interesting to explore. But I've always, I mean, I've worked with a lot of people who are high on the psychopathic spectrum, and watching them as they, as you say, struggle to describe an emotion they can't feel. I guess it's what essentially observation based, isn't it? You're kind of guessing what it must feel like based on what you see.
Yeah, and and like back when I was unaware, especially, it was especially hard because I would it I guess it's projection to some degree of I would assume they would feel the same thing I would in those situations. So let's say they felt guilty, but I would feel shame in that situation. I'm like, oh, this must be guilt because of how they would be acting and stuff like that. But since I'm feeling different emotions in the moment, and because I can't discern the emotions on my own, I was completely wrong in a lot of cases.
Interesting. You know, that's really fascinating stuff. For me personally, it isn't so much that, it's more numbness. So it took me a while to,
Mm.
like, the feelings I get are very slight. So
Yeah,
they're there, but like I've got to look for them. Nowadays, I'm
yeah.
more in touch with them, but for a while there, I was just apathetic for 90% of the day. I was either apathetic or
Mm.
stressed. Those are like my two states. Uh, Interesting, because I think a lot of people would assume that somebody who's narcissistic is completely alien to the concept of shame, that grandiosity
Interesting.
is a form of confidence.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're more saying that the grandiosity is more like perhaps arrogance, like superiority, but without high self worth.
Yes. I always say that I can be grandiose, but grandiosity is not the same as self compassion or self love.
Right.
Narcissists view the world in terms of like better and worse than like everything I'm always comparing to other things just to basically make sense of them. And people are no exception. I view everybody on this hierarchy of better than or worse than me. I think the almost the most intolerable thing would be seeing somebody as equal, but I can't even comprehend the idea of people being equal, if that makes sense. Like that, there's like that because every in my mind, it's like everybody has their own sets of values that can be basically categorized, and then those values can be weighted, and then there's always going to be somebody on top of the other.
Right.
And when you're grandiose, you think that you're on top of everybody. When you're vulnerable, you think you're worse than everybody. When it comes to flipping between grandiose and vulnerable states of narcissism, but there's no self compassion there. When even when I'm grandiose, my inner dialogue, if like let's say I mess up at something, is you're so stupid. Why did you do that? You're better than all these people. How could you allow yourself to do that? You're stupid and stuff like that. It's still the self hate's still there. It just doesn't come off as self hate because I'm also acting better than everybody.
That's pretty interesting, man, because it almost sounds like the grandiosity becomes something that you whip yourself with. Like the way you said you should be better than
Mm-hmm.
this because you're better than everyone. It actually
Mm-hmm.
becomes a punishment on yourself, a standard you
Yeah.
have to meet, like a high standard. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's never good enough.
right. So everyone who's watching this knows what not feeling good enough is all about.
Yeah.
So the idea that you're so different to everyone is, I don't know, it's not so true.
Kind of ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, there's still nothing you've said that is completely alien, but perhaps the extremities, or maybe it's more than not what's not there. So, like you
I
said,
would
yeah,
I would say it's a combination of what's not there and also lengths I'm willing to go to get these needs met, and the fact that like other people, everybody has narcissistic traits. Obviously, they can be narcissistic in certain situations. Like, let's say, I don't know, they won the law, they got a promotion at work, and they're going to be rather grandiose about that. They're going to be very confident, right? But for narcissists, we only have our narcissism to work with. I once heard it described as you have a you have a shed with a bunch of tools, right? You have a hammer, you have a wrench, et cetera, et cetera. But then narcissists only have like half those tools because we're so confined to like our narcissistic drives and urges.
Interesting. So yeah, so it's like what's lacking, then you got to double down on what is there in a sense, make most of what you do have.
Yeah.
Yes, it's really fascinating. Uh, and like I said, there's some things I relate to and other things not so much. That I guess this is where the empathy thing becomes interesting, because a lot of this conversation I want to transition into where you're at now and how you manage yourself now. I think I'm reading between the lines. You're a less harmful person than you were, so I want to figure out
Yes.
how you actually kind of manage that practically, because I'm assuming you still don't have empathy, right?
Not a yeah, no. I still don't understand it to this day.
Right, which is kind of like missing a leg, like it's not going to grow back because the brain's dark or something.
To my knowledge, at least, like I think the jury is still out how much I can develop it. Um, I do want to point out though, like something interesting that a lot of people don't know. According to a study called like the prevalence and stability of NPD over a 2-year treatment period or something like that, only 44% of narcissists actually lack empathy, which I think is fascinating. I'm one of the unlucky ones in that case, or lucky. I'll be honest. Sometimes I think that my lack of empathy may be beneficial, but I have been able to kind of, despite not, I learned very well how to fake it. Like one of the things I do for attention and to be praised is I act as a like therapist in quotes to my friends. It's like I give them this advice that's relatively speaking pretty objective and like I would say pretty good. And then they praise me and thank me because they're like, oh my God, you're so wise. You're so like good at talking about this stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's like a transaction that really benefits everybody, despite the fact that I'm missing a component that most would associate with an interaction like that.
Well, like you said, yeah, the benefits there. I mean, I have it in coaching. There's a kind of learned psychopathy I have to apply in coaching. I had it when I was working with criminal offenders, surgeons, police. They can't feel, who they're working with is feeling. Like, if I'm a surgeon, I can't be concerned about the well-being of my patient while I'm cutting them, or my
Right.
arms are going to start shaking. Like, I need to see just a
Yeah,
piece of meat on the table. Anything else, and I'm just going to fall to pieces. Uh,
exactly.
we see this people who burn out in, say, the therapy trade are the ones who feel too much. They're not distanced enough. They can't detach. And I do wonder. I'll be interested to see where this goes in the future. If there isn't a kind of a workaround where acting as if, not faking, but acting as if an empathetic person would act, would actually generate a system of genuine empathy in some kind of like cobbled together way. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I thought of an example. It was Louis C.K., the comedian, was talking about how the internet has made us all a lot more narcissistic because you can't see the pain on the other end, right? So
Yeah.
if I bully someone online and I just feel good for being this nastiness, letting the darkness out of it, because everybody's got it, and I don't see any pain. I don't see anything. It's just a screen in front of me. There's no feedback loop. Whereas if I go to a real person and call them a nasty name, see their like face crumple up and go, "Oh God, I know that feeling," which is
Yeah.
get fuck. I don't like making people feel like that. That's a horrible feeling. I know that feeling. And then I almost, well, really against my will, it'll be very hard for me to repeat behavior like that if I feel that empathy. Empathy becomes essentially a leash because I can't do that to people without going through what they're going to go through. So it's like if I stab someone and it feels like I'm being stabbed, I'm going to stop stabbing people, right? It's the same with
Yeah.
insults or bullying or manipulation. So a lot of people with empathy, that's how they're managed. They have a leash of, I can't do that to them because I'll feel bad. That's
Yeah.
actually surprisingly self-centered. There's very few people who say you feel bad and that will stop me even though I don't care about it. So talk us through a little bit. How is it that you manage your behavior to be less harmful than you were without that leash?
Well, my leash is needing to be affirmed and liked, and also shame. Um, I can't go around. I mean, and also there's no benefit to hurting people in my mind, right? At least just unprovoked. It's like why, like, but the lack of empathy does play into when I'm desperately trying to get those needs met, and then it's like, oh well, I don't have that leash, so I might trample over people. A lot of times, not even knowing. But or like assuming that they would react like I would, which usually isn't the case. But I do, but like, let's say I'm confronted on bad behavior, I'll feel like very intense shame because of the judgment and the what is being said about my character and stuff like that. So that does act as a leash per se, I guess. And for me, it's like it can be a very, and it may be it's an unhealthy degree of shame because it can be debilitating. I once got criticized for something at work, and it wasn't even a big deal. I don't want to get into it because I hate thinking about it. But I was so ashamed I literally drove home and hid in my room for the rest of the day. So that shame avoidance becomes, I would say, it becomes an even stronger leash in a lot of instances. A leash that's kind of strangling you every now and
Right.
then. Because I do question it sometimes. It's like, um, what would be a more effective leash? This something that inspires self hate, or something that inspires an equal amount of emotional reaction to whoever you hurt and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I think we're looking at two leashes that, the empathy leash is actually kind of a fragile one itself that can easily lead to
Mm,
shame. For example, people might start being dishonest because their honesty offends other people and the empathy hurts them. And yet, actually, being honest is
mm,
best for everybody involved. You got to like blast through that fragile reaction. So that leash, the empathy leash, I mean, I work with people who are absolutely imprisoned, like pinned to the ground by that leash. They can't move.
interesting.
They can't hurt anybody. They can't even risk it, no matter whether they've done something objectively harmful or the other person's just too sensitive or whatever. So they're absolutely tied down by it. It sounds like your current workaround is either it's just impractical, like the result of harming people just doesn't serve your interest anyway. It
Yeah,
doesn't help in terms of a transaction. It's a poor way to transact that deal,
exactly. I
or you
mean,
feel
it's
really bad for
again,
yourself.
yeah. I mean, what's the point? Why would I go out of my way to hurt people when all I want is to be liked and to be admired, or um, or to avoid shame and stuff like that? Those are all just like, I want to avoid hurting people just because, again, like I can't see a reason that somebody would, unless you're like actively sadistic for whatever reason. I can't see a any sort of real Machiavellian purpose in hurting someone unless it's like as a, well, I guess when I think about it, would you consider vengeance a sort of sadism?
I guess if there's pleasure in the pain of the other person, then certainly, yeah.
Probably, because I always described it more as like a satisfaction. It feels just, and that can be problematic. I've had to really learn to rein in myself in that way. Ask myself, like, okay, what could there, like, not everybody works for the same reasons I do. What could they have possibly been trying to achieve by this hurt? Was it purposeful? Which maybe the purposefulness is irrelevant. Whether vengeance should be sought, I would argue vengeance should never be sought. But there is a pleasure in what I perceive as what I avoid it nowadays, obviously. But in lashing back, it's like, look how you made me feel. You made me feel like this,
Mm.
which is obviously a flawed way to think, but that is the logic that goes through our heads a lot of the time.
Again, Very normal. I mean, the modern justice system is vengeance based. It's you hurt, so no one
Mhm.
will hurt you. I mean, prison is a painful place to go to. Fines are painful to pay. So it's punitive. And this I find this really fascinating. So where you're wrestling with I guess, the ethics of vengeance, who isn't, right? Who
Yeah,
anybody takes satisfaction in the perpetrator being harmed in return, then we are in the realms of sadism in some sense. Because justice and vengeance are not the same thing. If justice is balancing the scales, for example, we see in the criminal justice system that rehabilitation, reintegrating people into society, surrounding them with support is the best way to balance the scale to lower crime. But it's actually
right.
a pleasurable experience for the criminal offender. And
Yeah,
nobody wants them to have a pleasurable experience. So the statistical best thing to do in response to crime, the just thing to do, has nothing to do with vengeance.
mm,
I'm kind of digressing here, but what I'm trying to point out is, your trait is all too human. The human the
yeah,
I guess you could say it is the worldwide, absolutely accepted form of justice system is quite narcissistic. How do we get
yeah.
satisfaction by harming those who harmed us? Um, so it's interesting. So you've got this kind of shame leash, knowing that if you find out you've harmed others, you'll feel bad for yourself. Is that about the gist?
I would say so. Yeah, I would say particularly being exposed for harming others,
Right,
because there's been.
reputation kind of thing.
Sorry, what's that?
Like your reputation will be harmed by it and such.
Yes, and because it's like intolerable for me to how do I put it? It's so intolerable for knowing that people had that opinion of me. Even if that passes, like let's I actually have a personal example. There, I interviewed a woman on my YouTube channel. Her name's Wendy T. Berry, and she wrote a very influential book on called Disarming a Narcissist. Highly recommend it for anybody who needs help in that area. Um, but I did an interview with her, and I flagged a bunch of YouTube videos for copyright, and I didn't notice that I flagged hers of our interview. And she emailed me basically being like, "Oh, like, sorry, I didn't mean to offend you." And the idea that in that moment that she viewed me like that, that I could be that self-centered and stuff like that was so intolerable that like it bothered, like I couldn't sleep that night, even though I immediately emailed her back being like, that was completely an accident. Like, how do I fix this? And I did. But just knowing that in that moment she had that feeling about me, it just crushed me for the rest of the day.
Well, you're really kind of throwing off the idea that you're just this evil emperor just enjoying the pain of others without suffering yourself, which is the common view of narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
And quite an incorrect view, I know from my own studies. It's nowhere close to that. Even at the highest end of the spectrum, there's generally a lot of suffering on the side of the narcissist,
Mm-hmm.
probably almost equivalent to suffering they cause. And also, as we've sort of identified, like, do you really cause more suffering than others? That's debatable. Yours is out in the
Yeah,
open and obvious,
I
but
wonder sometimes. Yeah.
well, you spoke, what I was interested in is the naivety. So I get the sense, and correct me if I'm sort of not steel manning what you're saying here, but the idea that a lot of the time you cause harm, and it seems like in relation to not having empathy, because either you don't see that people are being harmed, and I'm guessing you just keep going, or you assume they think like you and you wouldn't be harmed in that situation. You would accept whatever your
Mhm.
behavior was, and so you assume other people would tolerate it as well and not imagine
Yeah,
that other
exactly.
people would react quite differently. So, I mean, sounds like what you're saying is a lot of your harm is really unintentional and actually
Mm-hmm.
unaware.
I would say there has been times in my life where it hasn't. Again, it's never for the purpose of hurting. There has been times in my life where, which have been comparatively very rare, that I knew that I was going to be hurting somebody, but for whatever reason, I thought it was justified or like worth it. Or it's like there is like always this mindset of like, well, this is for the greater good. Like I'll help them out later or whatever like that. That's definitely in the minority of times, but yeah, generally it's because I don't think they're going to be affected by it, or I just don't even think about it. Just because it doesn't even occur to me in that moment how it's going to impact the people around me.
Again, very human. Uh, my own similarities with you. One of them is there's certain emotions I really don't feel, and one that I really don't feel is offended. Like I get it as a
Jealous.
concept, and maybe a couple of times I've been insulted or something in my life, but so I will say something offensive in the same reason.
I see.
I would assume everybody listening is going to be fine with it because I'm fine with it, and I'd be fine with anyone speaking like this, even
Yeah.
if I disagreed with them. And I've been reminded time and again that that's not the case. Other people feel this thing called offended, and it really hurts. They really don't like it.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
Not really sure exactly what that feels like. I think I've had glimpses of it, like anger, maybe.
I mean, that's a really good analogy.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people who have this. Like one of the things I wanted to ask you about. There's a couple of things that floating in my head, completely different topics. One is uh, what the strengths are that you see from having this,
Mm,
not even calling it a disorder, if we were to just look at it as a different cognition. What are the
yeah.
benefits of that? I'm keen to hear a bit more about that. But also, you're talking like you spend a lot of your time feeling grandiosity or shame, but not self-love. I'm really keen to hear if there's been any exceptions to that, if there are any things that consistently give you a sense of confidence and self-love, or if you're basically just floating between being better than people or hating yourself.
I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, so we have the saying, like I am pretty involved in a lot of communities based around pathological narcissism and like recovery. We have this people we kind of get very annoyed at people who are like, oh, practice self-love because we just don't understand it. We have this joke actually of like when people say, oh, you have to heal your inner child, we say we don't have an inner child, we have a dead one,
Mm.
because we genuinely don't understand the concept of being able to love ourselves without somebody else telling us how great we are. And even then, I wouldn't even call it self-love. I would call it like, again, just being better than other people.
So I got to dig down on this one because this is quite fascinating, and also for my own information in terms of working with clients who feature on the spectrum of narcissism.
Hmm.
I mean, do you understand the concept of being proud of yourself even without outside approval or validation? So you did something, you know it's the right thing to do. Nobody else even noticed, and you feel some sort of rewarding sensation in relation to like reflecting on it.
Only when I'm imagining telling somebody else about it.
Okay. So you still have a
Yeah,
kind of wow, that's interesting. So you're
yeah.
basically having like a virtual approval.
It's interesting because my inner monologue, I don't even know if I'm like, sometimes I'll try to like, I don't even really speak in my head in first person. It's always imagining. It's either like it feels like everything's so performative. I feel very like, that's a big thing with narcissism. Everything feels fake and it's terrible. But it's either I'm imagining telling somebody about this, or that there's like or like I'm in a movie, like there's a narration going on about the things I'm doing, or like a television show or whatever. It's always, so my self perception is so outwardly based. I have a friend who is also a narcissist, and she put it perfectly, where she said, "Do you, do you understand? Like, do you find it hard to understand how other people know who they are without somebody telling them?" And I was like, "Oh my god, somebody gets it! Yes, yes, yes." Because I don't know who I am if somebody isn't telling
I saw an interview was on YouTube with, I'm not sure, I think she had antisocial personality disorder and of course MPD. There's a lot of overlap there.
me. Yeah.
She said she feels like a gas that fills the space. So whatever the space is, she'll fill it and take that shape, but she doesn't actually have any substance herself. So she was talking about like if she's socializing, she'll be whatever that person needs her to be. when the person goes away, she dissolves into kind of nothing. Is that what you're talking?
Very similar.
Very similar.
Very similar. I describe it as, imagine that like gaseous stuff, but instead of, I feel like a husk almost. Like that stuff is like inside my skin, and the skin is trying to stay together and match and like I need other people to kind of keep that in place to keep myself together, or that gap or that crap's going to come out of me.
Wow, this is really interesting. Because on one hand, you say shame is essentially you feel bad about yourself. On the other hand, you don't have a self.
Yes, I know it's contradictory. It's wild.
Oh, who isn't contradictory, right?
Yeah.
But when you say I feel bad about myself, who's the self you're referring to?
I don't know. Like this is one of the biggest questions I get, and one that I am still trying to wrap my mind around. And it might just be a limitation of, language, but I don't know. It's like I don't feel like I'm a real person, but at the same time I feel like an inherent, like I've heard it described, and I've described it as well, of like I'm um like I feel like I'm like almost a broken mess of little pieces of people, of like who I used to be when I was a kid, mainly, like just kind of floating around in myself, and those parts are bad. And maybe that's kind of what I'm trying to describe, but this might just be a limitation of how much I'm able to say about my inner world in that way, because it's like, how do I how do I describe it in a way that does it justice, especially when I don't understand what other people are, their internal experiences is. Like, I don't understand what it feels like to not feel empty.
Hmm.
Um, that's something that I assume for other people who don't feel empty, that it's very difficult for them to be able to comprehend, like, what does emptiness feel like, right?
Well, I do wonder. I'm always keeping on the forefront of neuroscience and so on, and one of the sort of more horrible things coming out of that field is the idea of the
Mm,
self being a complete illusion. The idea of consciousness being anything other than the kind of very early beta version of what it should be, and so on.
yeah,
Long story short, I think that people who do identify as a self, as a solid unit, as a oneness, are deluding themselves. Because, and I've been through this. You interview such people, and like, well, what do you mean? Who are you? Who is the you were talking
yeah,
about? And they just come up with pieces, bits and pieces.
yeah,
Somebody might even say something like, I'm a smoker. It's like, well, what about when you're not smoking?
yeah.
Is it like, I'm an accountant? Well, what about when you're home with your family? I'm a nice
It,
guy. What about when you're being mean to people?
yeah. What personality trait is truly consistent?
Right. There's nothing that lasts 100% of the time. There's nothing that's always present. So I do wonder if, in some way, MPD is just an absence of ability to form that illusion, and that you're actually seeing a more realistic view of the self.
You can't. It's funny, when I was younger, I that's why I used to, because like I didn't know I was a narcissist, but I mean it was kind of in the back of my head, but I just didn't really pay much mind. Of I was just smarter and more self-reflective than people, so I rationalized it. I told myself, no, this is how everybody is. They just don't have the, like, I see the world more realistically, and everybody else is just deluding themselves, or doesn't understand what their motivations are. I go back and forth on that nowadays, though. And even if it is an illusion, it sounds like a much more pleasant one to have than reality.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you're enjoying your version of it overly, but I do have optimism that should you continue on the path you're on, you might be able to find something that works for you. I'm really curious if it is possible for you to experience what I think, for lack of a better word, is pride. If I think of an example, let's
Self-love.
self-love, perhaps.
Yeah.
Um, but even if self-love is the opposite of shame,
Yeah.
pride would be the opposite of guilt. Pride's about an activity, a single piece of behavior. So, for example,
Interesting.
let's say I don't feel like doing a workout today, and I'm like, fuck it, and just push myself and I do the workout. The
Hmm.
sensation I get at the end of that, where I'm like, fuck yeah, I did it. That's the thing I'm talking about that you don't seem to be able to experience, at least not yet. Like,
No,
I
not
can imagine
unless,
somebody
yeah,
else going
unless I'm
like,
talking
"Oh,
to
fuck,
somebody.
you're so good at working out or whatever, right? You
Yeah.
play a movie." Um, but that isn't a self reward, though. Some people would have to do that, say, "I'm a good person," or like, "I'm so disciplined."
Yeah.
Something they'd have to like give themselves this longevity of trait or something. Whereas pride's just going like, "Fuck yeah, nailed it. That's what I'm supposed to do." Just now, just
Mhm.
here and now, just this time, sort of thing. And I do wonder if it's possible for you to set up a system like that where you, I don't know, might have forced at first.
It's,
We just kind of tick the
you
box.
know,
That was the right thing.
it's interesting. Like you were mentioning, like the neuroscience behind it recently, and there's actually a study that came out, relatively speaking, pretty recently about pathological narcissism. And I forget what the areas of the brain were. But there was two parts of the brain, one that was related to pleasure, and the other that was related to positive self regard and stuff like that. And that the interactions between those two would basically make like high self esteem, and that people with NPD actually have less of a connection there, so that we're forced to seek it from outside validation.
It's almost like a physical disability, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple other studies that support that there is abnormalities in the brains of narcissists and other people with personality disorders. Um, but yeah, I would. So that's kind of what worries me about. Will I ever be able to truly get to that point? I don't know. I don't know anything really about how much the brain can change in adulthood and stuff like that. But that is a factor that I always kind of keep in mind of trying to limit my expectations.
Fair enough. The optimism I have is, especially because I've seen people with a lot of brain damage or stroke damage and stuff like that, the brain can do these workarounds where it has kind of like a beta system that does almost the same job, almost as
Mm,
well, using a completely different part of the brain. It's almost like a sort of brain graft where it just steals another part and goes, "Yeah, you control the hand now, even though you used to have nothing to do with the hand." Um,
yeah,
that can be trained, and I do wonder if there was some sort of behavioral way to train yourself into a self-rewarding system that doesn't require those units. I don't know. I'm just
yeah.
speculating. Um,
That's interesting. I love it.
well, it's just ironic. I actually feel a lot of empathy for you because, I mean, my backstory is somebody who also sought recognition and approval from others and lived or died on that. Basically, if it
Mm,
was positive, I got to feel good about myself, and if it was negative, I didn't, regardless of my actual behavior, how well it aligned
yeah,
with principles or anything. Uh, but the system to replace that was, I guess, always available to me. I was able to
mm,
develop a system of self-reward through what I call core values, living by principles that I believe are right, and nobody has to agree with me. Um, but approval from others is like next best thing if you just don't have that system available. But
yeah,
unfortunately, it puts your confidence in the hands of other people's reactions, right? Like in the case you
yeah,
mentioned, the person say being worried that you've blocked their YouTube video. Uh,
mm,
they might have had another reaction. They might have said, "Oh, it looks like you made a mistake there," and in which case you wouldn't have felt shame. So it really depends on them, and that's kind of
yeah.
horrible.
When you're taking in all the positive affirmation from people, you also have taken the bad that people give you. You can't have just you can't like I always say that like on my social medias I can get 1,000 good comments, but just the one bad one is going to stick with me and feel true. Honestly,
So the weighting's different. So you give much more weight to the negative than positive in terms of feedback.
the negative lasts is what I would say, and the positive can evaporate very quickly.
Ah, okay, yeah. Again, I don't know anyone for whom that's not true. Really,
Yeah,
like that's social media. You want to destroy someone, give them one dislike on their otherwise loved post, and you're going to be in their thoughts for the rest of the week.
honestly.
So again, I guess what would be impossible to answer for you would be trying to figure out what's the difference between you and non-narcissistic people when actually almost everything you're talking about I can find someone with no diagnosis who has the same problems, maybe just to a lesser
Yeah.
extent. I guess the final thing I want to touch on is, as we're both aware, there are people with NPD who go, right, I'm going to do something about this. They get therapy, they do their research, they go, how do I live as harmlessly as possible, and so on.
Mm.
And then, of course, there are the others who don't. What are your top tips for the people who fall into the orbit of, shall we say, the unaware and much more harmful narcissist? People fall into the
Mhm.
orbit in terms of relationships or work connections and so on. How do people deal with someone like you when you're at your worst?
I'm at my worst too. I wouldn't advise anybody when I'm at the worst. Nah. No. That's a good question because like I would say, especially nowadays, because who's going to you go online, who's going to think they're a narcissist because they're looking at that. It's going to prevent a lot of people from getting to therapy. I would My biggest advice for anybody is strong and very clear boundaries. A lot of people with personality disorders struggle with recognizing where boundaries begin and end. Right? You can kind of see that in my own cognition of like the boundaries between myself and other people's opinions on me are blurred. And these people can be very domineering. People told me all the time that they would lose themselves in me, so to speak, which I don't understand that at all, if I'm being honest. And you have to be able to and like narcissists will respect you for this, for being a strong person. They if you're, and I say strong and not domineering, right? If you're like a little bit, if you are able to hold your ground, then it's like, okay, I can respect that. If you're, I don't respect people who just bow at everything I say, but I also don't respect people who are attacking back. I despise people who are attacking back. So it's because the only real advice I have is strong boundaries and being confident in yourself and like honestly just sticking up for yourself. And I think these things can apply to most relationships that people have.
Yeah, and again, it's like nothing bizarre or alien coming out there. That's interesting. I guess you're saying that if somebody was really self-respecting and held their boundaries strongly and stuff, that you would actually respect those boundaries, or are you going to keep trying to pick away at it and work your way through?
It depends how I view them. So here's a good example is my close friend who's also a content creator. She who's also a narcissist. Because of our hierarchical thinking, we have to view each other in our own separate hierarchies and somewhat equal in terms of what those hierarchies are. So if you can establish yourself as somebody who is like the more equal, the better. You can't be above because then we're going to envy and resent you. You can't be below or we won't respect you. So you have to be kind of on this middling ground.
Interesting. So it's almost like provocative if someone's. Hold on, I think I've lost signal a little bit there. Wait a second. Oh, there you go. You're back. So it's like provocative if someone's above or below you. They go,
Yes.
yeah.
It's and like it is intolerable for somebody to be equal to me if we're on the same hierarchy. And I know that probably doesn't make that much sense. But it's like if I can view you as a respectable person in kind of your own realm, more or less, where I would be able to relate to that structure that you have going on, is by far what I'm going to respect you the most.
Interesting. Again, that sort of sounds like you can see the signs that the person respects themselves and will hold their own ground
Yeah,
and is doing what they do,
we
that kind of thing.
interestingly enough, people with cluster B personality disorders, which is the grouping that narcissistic personality disorder is in, we can actually see emotions in the eyes better than normal people can. So we're going to be very sensitive to one well, especially with narcissists, how you perceive us. We're very like in tune to that, but also where you are on like the totem pole, so to speak. So we're going to be analyzing that like all the time in terms of like, oh, like what is the pecking order and stuff like that.
Right. So if you can see that somebody's feeling nervous about the company they're in, you're going to see them as lower on the pecking,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. And you're
Yeah.
also going to
Or
see if
like,
they're intimidated by you personally and so on.
yes, yes.
And then once you see that, it's kind of almost.
It's like, well, I know where you are. You're you're beneath.
So what would you need to, that's one of the things I don't quite understand. I'm sure you get it fully, you and your friend, this idea of equal on the hierarchy. So what do you need to see in somebody else that gives that status to them?
So there's so many. Yeah, it gets complicated because there's so many types of hierarchies, and it's whatever one I'm viewing as the most important at the time, right? There's a hierarchy of intelligence, of attractiveness, of social connectedness, of who's the most charming, gregarious, whatever. Um, and whichever one I find most central to my personality, to whatever I'm doing at the time, is the one where I am most focused on. Um, and I completely forgot the question. I'm sorry. What'd you say?
No,
I have
yeah.
ADHD too.
Oh, good. You got a whole bag of tricks, eh? No, this is good. This is basically what I'm asking is how do you decide what the hierarchy is?
Yes.
So you have a
Um,
preference at the time that's what, just arbitrary?
yeah.
It just depends how you
Like
feel.
it's basically like when I'm interacting with people who, like, let's say like influencers in quotes or content creators and stuff like that, I'm going to be viewing it like maybe in terms of followers or their where I view them like in relation to their specific niche and stuff like that. If I'm at a party, I'm going to be looking for the guy who is like talking to everybody, being super friendly and super popular. Or if I'm in a work setting, it's going, the social connectedness also plays an term there, but also performance. If it's in, I don't know, those are the only two examples that like actively come to mind, like social situations and work situations. I bet there's some for family situations too, but my you don't get personality disorder by having a pleasant family. So like I don't really have a good reference point there.
Yeah, I got so much more I got to ask you. I think we'll have to have another conversation at some point.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, but no, this is a good intro. I imagine like the person listening to this is someone who's heard that word narcissist thrown around. They have all the classic kind of misleading connotations with that word, and not once in their
Yeah.
entire lives have they heard somebody who actually fits the label talk about what that
Yeah.
actually means as an experience. And what stands out to me mostly is just how relatable your experience is, and not just because I'm somewhere on that spectrum myself, but
Right.
because I work with people who would consider themselves to be completely on the other side of that spectrum, and yet I'm just hearing the same shit that they do, just different strategy, different method,
Yeah.
same goals, same problems. You're definitely not the only person, or you and the other MPDs are definitely not the only people to feel empty or to be terrified that that is the feeling underneath the self.
Yeah.
Very few people, a lot of people who give themselves a very strong identity, I think, are fighting against the void. They just want to put themselves
Yeah.
something between themselves and the emptiness. Whereas you, for better or worse, just don't have the ability to close that gate. You have to look into the void. I don't want to get too.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Well, like I said, maybe in our next conversation we can focus more on the strengths and potential as well. Like,
Okay.
if you're somebody who can face the void because you have no choice. I mean, is there some good that can come of that? Um, but we'll start. Yeah, we'll wrap it up there, and let's just end it by you telling us a bit more about what you do and where people can find your work and so on.
Great. So, my name is Jacob Skidmore, and I run a lot of social media platforms called the Nameless Narcissist, which never gets, never feels quite right given that people know my name nowadays. But my main thing is I do videos on my YouTube. I try to talk about some research that I read and also my personal experience and just my journey in general of trying to recover from narcissistic personality disorder. I'm also on TikTok and technically Twitter, but nobody follows me there, and Instagram. So just type in the Nameless Narcissist. I've also spoken at conferences and been on a couple news articles. So just type in a nameless narcissist and you will find everything related to me.
I'll be sure to include links to all that stuff as well, wherever this is posted. Well, Jacob, I'm very sure that I want to talk to you more, and I feel like we've only just started, but it's a lot to process, and yeah, it's one of those conversations I have where I learn a lot, which is really cool.
Right.
So
I'm
appreciate
glad.
you. Yeah,
It's what I do.
yeah, and one of the things that I trust in myself is my radar for honesty, and I got a lot of honesty from you today, and I know that that's actually an effort you have to put in. Maybe more so than others, or something you've had to learn and go against your previous programming or methodology,
Yeah, that's
perhaps.
for sure.
Yeah. But my whole thing is honesty, and I'm sure that it will benefit you even if we looked at it as transactional benefit.
Yes.
Having a reputation as an honest guy and being trustworthy generally gets better rewards than the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Took a long time to learn that.
Yeah, me too, man. Me too. I was full of shit for most of my life. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us, and I'm sure we'll hear more from you soon.
Right. Thank you so much.